So hello, everyone. Really excited for a great conversation here. So Nate Ashton, Director of Accelerator Programs at Decode. We run an AI accelerator every single year because we see the impact that AI technologies can have on government across the board, right? Tons of different use cases, whether that's logistics or citizen services or HR, procurement, whatever it may be. So excited to hear from several different agency leaders on what you're working on, what AI means for you, and all of that. So let's jump right in if we want to start with introductions down the line, who you are, where you work, how you look at emerging technology, how that engages with your current role today.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Harrison Smith. I'm the Deputy Chief Procurement Officer at a place called Internal Revenue Service. Usually if it's around April, I make jokes about how you know who we are. No, but in all seriousness, within the areas that within procurement, we function quite often in the third and fourth quarter of the fiscal year. So more and more of our work shifts to the third and fourth quarter to the extent that the amount of work that we have processed in September has doubled over the past 5 years. That, when combined with a loss of 40% of staff, I'm all for doing more with less, but that's doing everything with nothing at some point is a logical extension of that. So it's not really a good idea. And I think when we get into conversations about automation or frankly just being more intelligent about what we're doing, the concept that continues to ring true for the folks that I work for is shifting from low-value work to high-value work. Having a contracting officer who is literally the only person who is authorized to obligate funds on behalf of the federal government, having them sitting down and typing the same publicly available DUNS number into the same publicly available websites is something that needs to be done, but is not necessarily something that they need to be sitting there hand jamming away at. So really helping understand where those choke points are. And understanding how we can apply technology, automation and otherwise, to improving the process and to improving the customer experience is something that we're working very hard at.
Hi, I'm Nathan Naik. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Census Bureau. So I don't know, many of you may be aware, just like the IRS, we are getting ready for the 2020 census. But aside from the 2020 census, which we call the decennial census, we do about ballpark 120 surveys throughout the decade, the years, and we have lots of data. So we consider ourselves the people who provide data about the people, place, and economy. Many of the economic indicators are produced by us along with some of the other bureaus, part of Department of Commerce. This is part of what we have, and from an AI perspective, we have lots of data.
Jesse Rollins, Defense Logistics Agency. I'm a data scientist with our Analytics Center of Excellence. We're really in the beginning stages of implementing AI and machine learning across the enterprise, so I do a lot of the technical oversight and strategic lead work. You can imagine how much impact this could have in our logistics nature, especially for delivering products to the warfighter on time.
Hi, I'm Alex Measure. I'm at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm an economist there. We do actually a lot of the statistics information similar to Census, and one of the ways that we're now using AI and specifically machine learning is to help us automate the processing and classification of large amounts of text information which we collect through our various programs. Maybe the best example of this is our injuries and illness program, which each year collects hundreds of thousands of written descriptions of work-related injury and illness. We used to have to manually read through each one of those descriptions and categorize them by hand. But this year, we did about 80% of that automatically using deep neural networks. So we now have a wide variety of programs exploring these applications of machine learning to data processing. And there's a lot of exciting work happening there at the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Hello, I'm Greg Allen at the Joint AI Center within the Department of Defense. We are a new organization that was stood up in the department officially last year, but we started getting money and people around January of this year. We are, according to the Department of Defense AI strategy, the focal point of the Department of Defense AI strategy, which means we have an awful lot of responsibilities that are DoD-wide related to sort of data governance and other issues in the department. And then we also are running projects internally in order to sort of develop and field AI capabilities. A few of those projects that are further along relate to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, predictive maintenance, which obviously supports logistics types activities, and then also cybersecurity. These are all areas where we feel that there are near-term applications of AI with mature commercial technologies where we can actually drive mission impact. And that really is our focus on sort of more near-term, more mature technologies. There are other parts of the Department of Defense that do great work thinking about the longer-term efforts, such as DARPA, such as the military service labs. But my organization, the Joint AI Center, is focused a little bit more on the near-term, mature-type technologies. One last major effort that we have is building up an AI infrastructure group. This is pretty common in commercial industry, as I'm sure most of you know. Almost all of the major tech companies that do have significant machine learning or data science programs or AI programs also have sort of a separate infrastructure group that manages those types of activities. We definitely see the wisdom in that and are trying to establish an AI infrastructure group not only for our own activities and our own programs, but also to make that available to the broader DoD. With the idea of generating positive momentum in our AI efforts across the department.
And so I've seen a lot of high-level discussion about the importance of investing in AI, bringing AI into government, whether it's the executive order in February or NIST coming out now with a roadmap for how to create standards around AI. Can each of you talk a little bit about how your agencies are strategically approaching the future of AI implementation at your agency? Head down the line?
Yeah, sure. I think similar to the work that's been done with Jake is that we like to think of it in different tiers, right? So you've got sort of the near-term immediate efforts which can show shifting from low-value work to high-value work. So a thing that will actually impact users in the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days, right? There's sort of immediate impacts that can be turned on pretty quickly. And some articles I've read, the estimate is you want to make sure that you're saving at least 2,000 hours of work for each automation that you're pursuing. We might think that's a little bit low, but if you can get an ROI that's decent in fairly short order, and it can use the term momentum, it can feed that momentum going forward, we think that's really important. You've got the sort of the second tier that we like to think about, which is, I'm a basketball fan, so I think of it as the mid-range game, the lost art of the mid-range jumper. But the areas that you're trying to make sure are slightly more complicated. So for the IRS, you can move from publicly available data to data that's more closely regarded to tax status or tax databases, more sensitive areas, because you need to be very intentional about how you do that, make sure that the cybersecurity and the privacy laws are all adhered to. And then you've got the third tier, which is really, I want to have an enterprise application to have this type of approach for this agency. And one of the things, and I'm curious what my illustrious compatriots here have to say about it, but I've seen at least once agencies or organizations go straight to, well, I'm going to adopt XYZ application or XYZ approach because it's in the magic quadrant or because I did some market research, and that's the only approach we're going to have. And I start to claw my eyes out because I said, I want to be clear here. So you don't have a car yet, but you're absolutely positive that you want a Porsche 4x4, with fuel injection engines and XYZ to travel on a road that you don't have yet. Why do you think you're there at a precise place where AI, machine learning, RPA, deep neural networks, whatever you want to call it, we're continuing to expand on this? So from my perspective, if you work to go standardize on a particular application or technology that you don't know how it works within your team, right? Because that's the point. If you're not sure how it works within your team, within your architecture, my belief is that you're headed in the wrong direction. Having that momentum, getting the near-term wins, and having it feed on the lessons that you're going to learn and how you're going to approach the mid-tier areas, as well as finally getting there to the long term, I think is really the way to go from a strategy standpoint.
So there are multiple contexts that we are pursuing at Census from an AI perspective. There is one context which is, okay, how do you roll AI out into the enterprise? So we basically are concentrating on three areas. The first area is the technology platform, to make sure that the technologies have the capability of supporting AI. You have the second part, which is the business processes, to make sure that the business processes align, are suitable with AI, because as Harrison said and some of the others, and even the previous presenters, you go from manual process to now this capability of creating models and things like that. And then you have a third part, which is the workforce. You have to make sure that you have the workforce ready to support those AI and those tools capabilities. So we at the Census are trying to address all three components. Then you have the next aspect, which is part of the strategy, is where are you going to apply AI? There is application of AI on the IT side, and there's application on AI on the business side. It has very different meanings. There are things like cybersecurity, there are things like operations, there are things like application development for HR and other functions. That's purely on the IT side. But then when you have the business side, and by the way, this is my third agency, each agency has a different focus on business. And every one of those agencies, by the way, a big issue is public trust. The federal government operates on public trust. Yes, there's return on investment, but if we cannot maintain public trust, there's no chance. And that's one of the biggest things we worry about. It's disclosure of public information, or PIR. There are laws, okay? Census has law, IRS has law.
At least one.
We talked about, and by the way, Harrison talks about just one. We at the Census, we have all the laws because we have all types of data. We have our own data, we have IRS's data. We have to always protect it, and we have to maintain the public trust. We also have healthcare data. So there are so many laws that we have to adhere to. So when we do these AI tools and these capabilities, we have to make sure that we are always protecting that, because that helps with the public trust, because then we can continue to get the data we want. So from an AI perspective, we are putting it in the context. It all depends on what is the context of the conversation we are having, whether it is with procurement, whether it's with management, or whether it is with the internal people.
I would follow the same kind of lines you guys are saying. As kind of the lead data scientist for AI at DLA, people get kind of thrown aback when I come in and say, I don't really care about the problems. I care about the process of how we get the problems through the pipeline. So people want to talk about algorithms, they want to talk about what neural net we're going to use, where we're going to deploy it. What I really care about is I care about two main enablers, and that's data, right? Can I get to it? Where is it? How clean is it? Can I get other people's data? How quickly can I get new data requirements fulfilled? And probably the other big one for me is governance, right? So we're introducing kind of a scientific methodology to a lot of agencies that aren't scientific in nature, right? You're going to come in, you're going to do this iterative process of learning, discovering, hypothesizing, and then doing it over and over and over again. And you're going to build on each failed or successful experiment. And so do we have the governance structure in place to capitalize on that? A lot of what you see now is like grassroots projects, quick wins. Where's the documentation behind those models? Because I'm going to use that in the next step. And without that proper governance in place, we're never going to get off of first base. If I don't have all that learning and all those lessons learned and all those failed projects to build on, I can't move forward in the future. And of course, protecting the public, there's laws. There's also ethical concerns. Every AI model is going to have an ethical concern because you're impacting a human being. They all look innocuous at first, but guess what? They're built on data, and that data is always biased. And if you don't have those checks in place, you can get in a lot of trouble. So I think strategically, it's not about the problems for me or the business decisions or the shiny objects. It's about, can we build an ecosystem to take a business problem, move it all the way through, learn, stack on top of it, and move again and again and again to get to a real capability for the agency.
So I'd say one of the ways that we approach AI at the Bureau of Labor Statistics is actually to start with some need, some problem that we need to address. It's not something that we just sort of have to sprinkle on everything that we do. We start with a problem. We look at the various solutions that are available. And the next thing we look at for determining whether to use AI is if we have the data. Probably the most powerful technique of AI is supervised machine learning, in which a computer essentially learns from data how to perform some task. If you don't have that data, it's going to be very hard to apply those machine learning techniques to your task. And so I think if you get those first two things right, a lot of the other stuff is much easier to deal with.
Great, so I would echo the sentiments of a lot of my colleagues, just to build off of what we just heard. The reason why we're so concerned about data is because machine learning is sort of a different style of programming. In traditional programming, every line of code is typed out by someone's human hands, ultimately. With machine learning, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but to a sense, the algorithm is being applied to a data set, and that is the source of the programming code. The machine is essentially programming itself based on exposure to data. The reason why that's interesting is because there's a lot of things that used to be impossible when programmed by human hands, and suddenly they're easy or possible, whereas they used to be hard or impossible. This is all quite interesting, but it does require that you have not just a lot of data, but a lot of the right kind of data. If I want to develop a computer vision algorithm that analyzes drone imagery automatically, airborne sensor video imagery, then census data is not going to help me. Right? No matter how much of it I have. So what matters is that I have a sufficient quantity of the right type of data of sufficient quality. And so our process for determining what types of projects to pursue is to identify, where can we find useful data sets where machine learning might be plausibly used, then what are the mission impacts that we could possibly have in order to do that, and then do we have somebody in the Department of Defense who would give us access to end users. I think our vision of modern software development is that if you don't get feedback from users, if you're not doing user testing, your odds of delivering something that's actually going to be of value go way, way down. And so that sort of three-part checklist is part of our vetting process to determine what types of projects might be attractive. As I think it was described a bit earlier, one of the goals of the JAIC is to sort of identify low-hanging fruit for AI in the department and then go pick it.
If I can pivot off one thing that I think several of the gentlemen mentioned was that there's a shift of understanding where the emphasis is, right? Making sure that you have the right kind of data, making sure that you understand, hey, this may be a broken, sort of rote, mechanical, repetitive process, but if I don't have time to give the experts, the people who are doing it right now, if I don't give them the time to take a step back and say, you know what, how would I do this if I had these new tools where things were impossible before? If I don't give them time to do that, they're never going to be able to improve the situation. And you've got this shift of what the expert is, right? I don't consider myself the expert on what processes should be automated within even the IRS's Office of the Chief Procurement Officer. You've got to ask the people who actually do it on a day-to-day basis. And it's really interesting when you go down and you have a conversation with an individual, or you sit in a staff meeting and say, what is the task that you do most frequently that you think adds the least amount of value? And there's just stunned silence, for a little bit, but then the hands start popping up. They'll say, well, I wish I didn't have to do this, or why doesn't this system talk to that system? Well, tell me about that. How often do you do that? And you start finding out pretty quickly, well, we do that 4,500 times a year. Oh, okay. Or, hey, there are 55 data fields for 12,000 transactions. Well, I can't do the math that well, but that's a lot of data fields and a lot of transactions, right? So when you start taking a step back and looking at, hey, where's the end user? What do they need help with? And ultimately, are they actually going to use the solution, quote unquote, that you've tried to get them to? And if you don't have that iterative process, you will fail, because no one's going to want to use the bright, shiny object that you have, regardless of how many cool terms you throw at it.
Yeah, Jesse, you were talking about the same thing, right, at DLA, where you had to start small, work with the end user. Can you talk a little bit about how you built that out?
Yeah. So we're in the infancy stage. So a lot of these things popped up, with innovative people in their own offices. They're like, here's the problem I have. I've heard about this AI thing. Maybe we can apply it and solve it, which is a great way to start. And you're exactly right. It has to start with a business problem. And so as the data scientist, I can't come in and tell you where to apply AI. I have no idea. Do you want me to spend time learning how to apply these methods, or do you want me to spend time learning your business? And with the turnover of your data scientists, they're not going to learn your business. It's going to take them a decade, and you're not going to be around for 3, 4, 5 years maybe. So it all has to start with engaging the business user, having that governance in place to say, okay, we've canvassed all the management, we've canvassed users, here's some things, here's some problems that they're having difficulty with that are highly repeatable, there's a lot of data on, let's categorize them. Let's see what we can actually solve. Let's pick out the low-hanging fruit. But you have to have that structure in place, or you're just randomly picking problems all over your agency, and it might not be the best money spent.
That's a great point, and I'd love to build off it. I described one of our major tasks as identifying low-hanging fruit and picking it. The other major task that we have is identifying parts of the Department of Defense that don't have low-hanging fruit but ought to. So for instance, in a maintenance activity, there's an awful lot of the Department of Defense that is still storing its maintenance records handwritten on paper. Right? And there's also a lot of sensors attached to defense vehicles or other systems, and they produce an awful lot of data, but the amount of storage available to them is such that they have to wipe the data after a certain number of days. So you actually don't have 10 years of historical data, you might only have 10 weeks of historical data, which is really unfortunate. So if we want to have sort of the opportunity for a much more broad-based exploitation of AI across the Department of Defense, over the long term, the sort of two things that we have to do is not only just identify the attractive low-hanging fruit, but also ensure that we're planting a lot of seeds for fruit in the future in the department. And that does get back to data governance.
And I think Greg brings up a very important issue, which is a lot of agencies are sort of generating the data that could be used for AI systems as part of their existing manual processes, but they're just not saving it in a way that will allow future people to build those AI systems. And I think that's the AI stuff that we've been able to do at the Bureau of Labor Statistics has all been possible because someone before us has thought carefully about how to store and record this data. And so I think that's a critical piece of the infrastructure in implementing AI is to make sure you have good processes for saving and recording and cleaning that data.
So if I may just jump in here. So at the Census, we've been embarking on something called the data lake. And what our goal is to try to get all the data. So there is all sorts of data. Harrison talked about data. Everyone's talking. There's different types of data. You've got structured data. You've got semi-structured data. You've got now data coming from sensors. You've got autonomous things happening. Data is coming from all over the place. Okay? We have to now figure out how to manage it. And that's where cloud technology, the Hadoop technology, and the newer technologies which are coming out in the open source world help us manage that so that we can have the data available for the AI models to be able to learn, to do supervised machine learning. So our goal is to, again, as I said, bring up a technology platform, then go address the business processes. So the technology side, we're going on the data lake. On the business side, I mentioned about public trust. We are heavily invested in something called, some of you may be aware, NIST has put out some new recommendations, but the Census Bureau is sort of leading in this field is differential privacy. So just like machine learning is helping us, well, guess what? Machine learning is helping the other side also by able to linking records. So there is the notion of how can we do disclosure avoidance of PII using differential privacy algorithms and apply that to the data that we are exposing. Census plans to expose a lot of data to the AI models, to the people who want to use AI. This will be public data which will go through a protection process so that no PII is exposed, but the data is needed for these models to operate. And then we are going to it's great. We had a lot of survey statisticians. Now we are calling the whole field data scientists. Okay? They were the same people who used to create these algorithms, these models, and they used to program it in SAS and other standard tools. Now we are asking them, hey, program them in the newer platforms which have more capability, like R, Python, Spark. Okay, that's a transformation. That's a workforce transformation. They have to now take the algorithms that were talked about and put it in newer platforms so that we can take advantage of that. So that's a lot of work for an enterprise. Yes, we can take small, low-hanging fruit, but it's a fundamental change in the mindset of the organization to be able to adopt those capabilities.
So I think I've heard everyone mention low-hanging fruit and quick wins at this point. So I'd love to hear from each of you. What are the low-hanging fruit that you see? What are the problem sets within your agency that you see quick wins coming out of, and what outcomes could you expect from using AI with those problems?
For us in the procurement field, at the very least, and that's where we're focusing on right now, it's the repetitive rules-based efforts, for which there's a lot of historical data. So we definitely have repetitive, right? We process about 12,000 transactions a year at the IRS alone. We most certainly have rules-based. There's more than just one rule on that's for sure. But it's also it's those having those consistent processes that we really look at. And I think one of the areas that one of the areas that we're really focusing on is how do you find out whether or not it's actual low-hanging fruit that you can get to and eat and utilize, and if it's not, turn it off and go somewhere else. I think most of the folks have commented at some point about the importance of the human aspect of this. Stephen Blank has a concept called organizational debt, which is if you've got a bunch of folks who are really interested in running around breaking things and learning how to do things differently, and you have the other quote-unquote rules-based portion, who's like, well, where's my org chart? Where's my template? How's my data going to look? Where's my governance? And you let one side get out of whack relative to the other, you're never going to be successful. So what we're really focusing on doing at the IRS and in the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer is how do I test this emerging tech, this automation solution quickly, and then if it doesn't work, turn my attention to somewhere else. Because again, we have this feeder cycle that we're really working on. And ultimately we had implemented 3 at this point within the procurement processes. And now we're going after the Federal Procurement Data System, which is where we house all of our obligation data. Similar to Census, which obviously has a lot of source data, there are a lot of firms, people, individuals in the room who use services and use information that actually come out of usaspending.gov, Deltek, whatever it is. And that data is really important to a lot of people. And so focusing on making sure that it's clean, focus on making sure that it's accurate, and ensuring that I'm not asking a contracting officer to go back and enter in information that he or she doesn't absolutely need to because it exists somewhere else, and have them pay attention somewhere else and add value to the customer. Those are the areas that we're really looking at to begin with. Again, small areas that we can pivot off of, and areas that will really make a difference in rules-based, repetitive processes.
I mentioned the disclosure avoidance. One of the other areas we are looking at, we collect a lot of business data, and we are looking at how can we get more accurate NAICS codes. So the economic data is based on what businesses, what products you're running, and it's very different nowadays with mergers, acquisitions taking place. It's difficult to say, okay, what is this business actually selling or using or whatever it is. And so we are trying to use AI and machine learning to help us better associate NAICS codes with these records so that we can put out better products or more accurate products out there for the industry. Again, as I mentioned before, our data is used all over the place. It's used by the businesses to make decisions on where they are going to invest or what they are going to invest in, and we want to increase the accuracy of our data sets.
That term low-hanging fruit is a pain in my side sometimes. From the RPA side, it can be a little bit easier to identify those things like highly repetitive tasks that we can track in the system, and we can automate those a little easier. From the AI side, it gets a little more deceptive, right? Because you can see something that looks like low-hanging fruit, and as soon as you dive in, it's an unsolvable problem, right? Because most of these things are going to be failures, right? And if they were really low-hanging fruit, we would have solved them a decade ago. We're trying to use really complicated methods and a lot more data to solve really complicated problems. When I hear the term low-hanging fruit, I really think of problems that are generated by small business offices, right? I've got an office of 100 people doing something, and a small AI model would radically change how their business operates. It's hard from an enterprise level down to get to those pieces of low-hanging fruit without educating your workforce first. So I think a big thing that we have to do at DLA is really train our management and our decision makers to identify that low-hanging fruit for the data science team. Because we have a lot of issues identified right now, but they're still, when you dive into them, they are so huge and so complex. And we're never going to get to that low-hanging fruit without first educating the entire workforce on what the capabilities are so they can recognize them for us.
I like that point about low-hanging fruit. Sometimes low-hanging fruit looks like it's low-hanging, and then you can't quite get to it.
It takes real bad.
It's really hard to get to. I would say a lot of the sort of obvious applications of machine learning at the Bureau of Labor Statistics are very similar to the applications at Census. We do a lot of coding. We collect a lot of text information about people's occupations, establishments, industries, how people are being injured, what products people are buying. And in order to sort of aggregate that information into estimates that we publish to the public, someone has to go through and categorize those things. So we've had a lot of success using machine learning to help us do that with work-related injury and illness information. This summer we've had a whole bunch of projects working on applying these same ideas to many other areas, classifying products, classifying occupations, classifying occupational requirements. So there's a ton of stuff that at least looks like it's low hanging, and we'll see whether it turns out to be.
I think one of the differences between my own organization, the Joint AI Center, and the other folks on this panel is that we have a lot of sensor data in the Department of Defense. So whereas these folks are mostly interested in stuff that 50 years ago would have been exclusively paper records, but today can be digitized and you can play around with it in a digitized environment, we also have stuff that 50 years ago was captured on celluloid film. And now is digital video data, is digital infrared data, sonar data. A lot of these areas are attractive environments for machine learning algorithms. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing in our humanitarian assistance and disaster relief initiative. In this case, we're going to be flying an airborne sensor over in one of our projects. There's multiple projects covering a bunch of different areas. But in one of our projects, we're going to be flying airborne sensors over wildfires in California. And then we're going to be collecting full motion video data of that activity. And then we're going to be automatically using a computer vision algorithm detecting which frames of the video have active wildfire. And if you've ever experienced wildfires or heard about them, they move quite fast over the course of several days. And keeping track of where they are and where they're headed is a real challenge for first responders in disaster situations. And the sort of typical standards for FEMA and other disaster relief organizations is to try and get out maps distributed to all of these organizations once per day. We believe that we'll be able to cut that to about once per hour and distribute it over the sort of mobile app that is commonly used by the National Guard and other organizations. So by switching to this airborne sensor, applying an AI computer vision algorithm, and then converting that into geolocation data that is usable through a map application that we are also developing, we're really able to make an impact to our users in a short time frame. We expect to be testing in the field with the National Guard in a matter of months. And my organization had basically no money in January and no people in January. So I realize, if we were Google and Facebook, testing with operational users and making mission impact in 8 months, sounds like an eternity. But in the Department of Defense, that's light speed. And we're really excited about this upcoming testing environment that we have. And that's one of the areas where we can make an impact. The reason why we think this is interesting is that these types of sensor data environments where we're collecting an extraordinary amount of data often tend to have a human bottleneck. In the case of airborne video imagery analysis, this is something where we've been hiring at an incredible pace to try and keep up with the volume of video imagery data that we're collecting. But the pace at which our data gathering is increasing and the pace at which we could realistically hire people and afford salaries to do that kind of work, there's just no comparison. If we did not have access to this sort of automation path, we would never keep up with the data deluge that we're dealing with. So there are environments in the Department of Defense that do look like this, and they really are low-hanging fruit for AI applications. Assuming, right, that you have access to the right kind of data, you have access to a user community who is willing to let you prototype and test, and assuming that there are mature machine learning algorithms that are relevant to the data set that you want to play around with. So we're excited, and we hunt for those opportunities all the time.
So to pick up on what Greg is saying, these things are important even in our realm. So from the census standpoint, one of the key things for us is things like, addresses, vacant housing, new divisions being built. By the way, how many of you know this hotel was not here a year ago? This was a parking lot.
An expensive one.
An expensive one. Well, guess what? For us, as we said, we keep track of addresses. We keep track of businesses. For us, this is a new establishment. So we get these images. So to Greg's point, we are taking images. We are working with companies. Companies are also building their own AI. Esri is part of a tool that is used for mapping. We take that information, we take additional information from counties, from states, from federal government, and we put it together. And we say, okay, now there's an establishment here. That means that we have to be able to get data about that establishment. So a lot of these technologies are going to start coming together and feeding more data. And the question then is, okay, how do you match that data up? And human beings will not have enough time to match it. And that's where technologies like AI and machine learning will hopefully help us do it faster so that we can produce faster data for the others to use.
I just want to echo a point that was made quite a bit earlier, but in general, this automation allows people to go to higher value tasks. In our case, it is not the case that we are getting rid of all these video analysts. It's that instead of staring at vast swaths of empty video images, the computer can say, these are the images that are actually worth looking at. And so they can devote their time better to the more high value added efforts. And that's true in video imagery analysis, but in general, that's true for just about all of our AI efforts.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have a joke in the office. It's not a Terminator, it's a toaster oven. Like it just takes a task that you ask it to do and does it for you, as opposed to holding it with a spatula over a flame, right? I think something else you've heard consistently is the ability to pivot and the ability to test. And I think one of the areas that we're really focusing on at the IRS is how do we create an acquisition and procurement approach that doesn't require you to, one, know exactly what you want for a whole bunch of data that you don't currently use, or I have a bunch of data and here are my guiding principles, and these are the problems that I'm having. Industry, why don't you figure it out? You tell me where the problems are. So the IRS just posted, I think 5-10 days ago, a draft solicitation to pursue automation solutions to help with the federal procurement data system, the contract obligation data that I was talking about. And there were really 2 or 3 main areas that we worked on. One, it doesn't pose a solution. It doesn't say, I want you to do this. I want you to take this set of actions, a series of 200 thou shalt statements. It says, here are my problems, and here are my goals. I want you to improve the data, and I want you to limit manual rework. And that was it. The other point that was important is that it was 6 pages long. The solicitation, the government solicitation, was 6 pages long, and that's because there was a 3-page intro. And so the conversation about the people and the partners that you work with and where the data comes from so that folks can understand where it is, there's a fundamental shift in adopting this type of approach and this type of agile technology that's usually used in the R&D arena. Right? Folks are used to other transactions authorities. Folks are used to having cyber research projects that don't go past the first phase. We in the government don't always have that same mindset of, hey, I have a portfolio of 5 things. I'm only going to fund those initially for 6 months, 6 weeks, whatever it is. Let me pivot to the ones that work, and then let me have them prototyped, and then the next step is to test it with the user. And I don't want to do that in 8 years. I want to do that in 8 weeks. And so that concept in a technology space, in a services space, in a solution space is not that robust yet. And so it requires a conversation about risk. It requires a conversation with your acquisition and procurement partners. Because if we're going to dream up, hey, I want you to draw me up an AI strategy for all the data that I have and that I will continue to have, you'll do nothing at plan for the next 30 years and then start over again for 30 years. And we'll never get to anything approach even a mildly good tasting low-hanging fruit, right? So that's the balance, and those are the areas that we're really working at within the IRS, is how do we do this quickly and how do we identify the ones that work and the ones that don't work and move ahead and learn from that and improve going forward.
So I'll try to leave a couple minutes for questions here at the end, but would love to close out with each of you. What are you most excited about looking forward in terms of the potential for AI to really disrupt things?
I personally am most excited about having the people that I work for be able to focus on things that add more value to their customers. One of the things that we've done in the IRS is we actually issued a survey to every single one of our active industry partners that has a contract with us. I don't know many folks who do that. We issue customer service surveys to the folks that we support in the CIO, to other entities and bureaus that we support. And we're trying to get to where is our value proposition, right? Where is our value proposition at the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, and how we support the taxpayer, and how we support the CIO, and how we engage with our industry partners. For being in an office that buys stuff, we're in sales quite a bit. Right? We have to sell the concept of, hey, the IRS is willing to engage in these types of emerging technologies. You should come contract with the government, even though you may not think it's a good partner to have, because we do think it is. We have data scientists, contracting officers, and contracting specialists are in high demand. Want to have them make sure that they are able to do valuable work that supports the customer and is frankly rewarding. There's a lot of work for them to do, so we're not trying to get rid of the team. We're trying to have them focused on things that are more valuable to themselves and more productive and more valuable to the customer.
In our case at the Census, depending on which portfolio, I mentioned the IT or the business, our whole idea is to improve efficiency and improve the quality of data available for decision making. That's the fundamental thing. Whether it's to the outside world or internal, we just want to make sure we have better data.
I think for me, on the technical side, it's radically changing, managers and employees' lives. Like, when you deploy a successful model, and someone comes up to you and says, "We've been doing this for 40 years this way, and now you've multiplied our output by 40 to 100 times." Like, that's a good feeling. Yeah. and the giant enterprise models are great, but radically changing small offices throughout an agency is really exciting for me. And I think that's where a lot of the disruption is going to come from. Not the giant ones, but small changes throughout an organization that kind of stack up to a giant cultural change.
But I'm sorry, but the government is so good at large-scale, long-term IT projects. We're awesome at those, right?
You'll have to give me that playbook.
Yeah. It'll be a short one.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I'm looking forward to these techniques helping us automate a lot of routine and maybe not super enjoyable tasks that are a critical part of government, and not only automating those tasks, but allowing us to do those better. I think looking forward, some of the technologies that are really interesting to me are there's been a lot of developments in this sort of field of transfer learning, which is basically techniques for allowing you to train models when you don't have a lot of training data. And that's going to open up the range of tasks that we can apply these techniques to. And the other thing that I'm really interested in is something Nathan mentioned, which is the differential privacy. It's a set of tools for allowing you to sort of use information while still protecting the privacy of the individuals that contributed that information. That's really critical to government and also to almost everyone, because data is the key ingredient into these machine learning systems, and a lot of that data is private and should remain private. And these tools are giving us good ways of sort of maintaining both of those, usability and privacy.
So my organization exists to generate mission impact for the DoD components and the armed services. So what I'm absolutely most excited about over the next year is that a lot of our minimum viable products are going to be in the hands of end users in the DoD, which is really exciting. And as I said before, our approach is very much to take a minimum viable product theory of the case, which states that this is not going to be everything you need or everything you want, but please try it out. See how it works, tell us how we can make it better. That iterative development loop with user feedback we think is critical to all modern software development, and it's absolutely critical to AI software development. And that user testing, you're going to be hearing more about it just in a matter of months. There's some really exciting news coming out from us.
Great. Well, huge thank you to all of you. Do we have time for a couple questions? No, it looks like we're getting cut off. All right, well, we'll have to find everyone in the crowd. Thank you so much. Thank you.